Well, hi everybody. I'm Beatty Redos, and welcome again, my friends, to the Ask Beatty Show. And the theme song for today, of course, is "What the World Needs Now is Love, Sweet Love." I mean, isn't that an understatement? There's so much dissension in people's personal lives, politically, professionally, and we are going to need to do a much better job in trying to find ways to come together, to come up with win-win resolutions. Of course, I say this to my patients, all the time in my private practice here in New York City and East Hampton. And by the way, let me just say that for those of you who are tuning in for the very first time, because I cannot believe that I have been hosting the Ask Beauty Show here on the Progressive Radio Network. I'm going into year number 14. It's like, where has the time gone? But I am a nationally recognized psychotherapist and sex therapist, and I'm the author of a groundbreaking book on relationships, a book that I oftentimes say that I only wish that I had had when I was beginning my own dating and relationship life. Believe me, it would have made my own life much easier. I'm also the advice columnist for Dan's papers in the Hamptons and in Palm Beach and also in New York City. And for those of you who are not able to get the actual copies of the magazines, you can just Google Ask Beatty, Dan's Papers, and I'm actually going into my fourth year. I write two Ask Beatty columns every single month. I'm a national speaker, and of course, I've been in the national radio and television world for many years. And it really all began when my first book, For Better, For Worse, Forever, Discover the Path to Lasting Life, actually came out. And I think one of my greatest passions, really, I think the greatest passion, other than the love and the passion that I feel for my husband, Jim, is my private practice. And I've been in private practice now for over 35 years. I've treated thousands of men and women and children and adolescents from every single walk of life. And it has been a real privilege for me that people have entrusted me for all of these years to help them really navigate the ups and downs of life. And believe me, nobody is immune from the ups and downs of life. And one of the things that I say all the time here on the show and in my columns is that we don't need to navigate the complexities of life on our own. And there are times that the very best thing that we can do is to reach out and get some good professional help. So, what is this Ask Beatty show really all about? Well, we talk about, of course, mental health issues and relationships and sexuality. And we try to figure out together all of the things that we can actually learn and do to really be able to make our lives happier and more joyful. And it's certainly not an easy thing at all. I mean, you look at what is going on in the world today. In fact, I wrote an article for my Ask Beatty advice column in Dan's Papers, and I mean, this right, wrong attitude, you're a winner, I'm a loser attitude, it is destroying us. It is destroying us as a country. It is destroying us in our personal relationships. And it really is this all or nothing thinking that is making it almost impossible, to be able to find and maintain healthy and happy lives and relationships. And then I think the reality is, and I haven't seen this, I think, ever, is that people are really becoming more and more polarized in their thinking and also in their behavior personally and professionally and politically and religiously. But my feelings are is that we pay an enormous price when we insist on always needing to be right. And in the process, we lose valuable opportunities to expand our understanding about issues, about the other, and also about ourselves. And it's interesting, when I'm interviewed by the media, people say to me all the time, Beatty, what do you really think are the most important ingredients that make or break relationships? And as I say, I've treated thousands of people from every single walk of life. And without exception, the relationships that work the best at the highest level do so when people are committed to working out their differences. You know what the Beatles song, "We Can Work It Out." And I think if we have that mindset, rather than the mindset of needing to win and you needing to lose, and of course, I'm not talking about on the tennis courts where I always want to win, our lives could be a lot better and a lot happier. And a let's try and work it out mindset, coupled with effective communication and problem solving skills, I feel, whether we're talking about our personal relationships or whether we're talking about our professional relationships or our political relationships, those are the essential those are the essential ingredients to relationship success. And, one of the things that I was thinking about that I really want to share with you is like how to embrace a "we can work it out" mindset. How do we actually do this? And the fact is that nobody likes conflict. I don't like conflict. I'm sure you don't like conflict. And yet the reality is that people have differing views, and that's got to be okay, and beliefs about almost everything, whether we're talking about religion, whether we're talking about health, whether we're talking about money or politics or parenting or relationships. And let's remember that world-renowned experts in every single field are often in disagreement in some way to a greater or lesser degree. And despite differences, here we have it again that open communication is absolutely key if we were to come together again with win-win solutions. And I think if you ask yourself, is that really not the object? That you and your friends and your partners and your children and your colleagues, that really would be an amazing goal to find ways to make compromises, to make trade-offs, leading to a win-win-win resolution. And then there was a question that I was pondering because I really wanted this column to address how the "I'm right and you're wrong" mindset is a lose-lose prescription for relationship success, whatever relationships we are talking about. And I have found, and it would be interesting to really hear from you, that both in my personal and professional life, that people who are not afraid to open their hearts and minds to differing points of views are individuals who basically feel secure. They feel secure within themselves and are therefore they're not afraid to entertain other viewpoints and beliefs, and they're not afraid to be wrong. How often have you been able to say to yourself and maybe say to a friend or a family member, you know what? I was off base. I was wrong. And it is important for us to be able to acknowledge when we're wrong, when we have misspoken. And the people, again, who are able to do this, they're open to hearing about and examining other ways of looking at issues. And they exhibit it's a maturity. And of course, not everybody has the maturity or the intelligence or the inner strength and confidence to know and to be able to acknowledge to ourselves that no one has the definitive word on any subject or issue. And as a result, they are not threatened or afraid to engage in conversations outside of their comfort zones. I mean, it's really easy to always be with people who, continually agree with you. But I think that it is just so important. Our countries, our communities, we would all be safer if we were all able to engage in the difficult conversations, but again, the mindset. If the mindset is win-lose, we are going to basically lose as a country, as a community, in our families. But if we open up our hearts and our minds and our intelligence to a win-win resolution, it's absolutely amazing. It is amazing what can happen. And what I do not want to do today, of course, is to forget to wish all of my friends and family and colleagues a Happy New Year, Shana Tova. It is the Jewish New Year beginning tonight after the sunset. New beginnings. And this is something that my dad used to remind me all the time, that we didn't need to wait for the beginning of the calendar year or the beginning of a Jewish New Year, but that every day we have an opportunity to make good choices, to make choices that are really in our best interest, which is why I have my How Are You Doing segment, that I ask you the same questions every single week, because I think it's important. I think it's really important that we are honest with ourselves in really viewing how our relationships are really going. And of course, the first is our mental health. So how are you doing? And again, we all go through many, many ups and downs in our life. But if you're finding that the depression or anxiety or substance abuse and things are really out of control, and you're finding that despite the exercise and the meditation and the weightlifting, that things are not getting better, the real question then becomes, what are you going to do? And I have a mantra that I've had for many, many years. And that mantra is that if we were only able to embrace the idea of acknowledging, addressing as best as we can the things that continue to get in the way of our life and our relationships. And in doing so, it's absolutely amazing how we can change our lives and how we can change the trajectory of our lives. So again, if you're not feeling good and you haven't been feeling good for weeks or months or years, today is a new day, and you can join me in the Jewish New Year and say, okay, today and this year, I am going to do something about it. And it may very well be, reaching out and getting some great professional help. And I also want you, of course, to take a look at your relationships. And I have a philosophy, a zero toxicity philosophy when it comes to relationships. And I think it's really important that we are honest with ourselves. We want supportive, loving people in our lives, which does not mean that there are not going to be conflicts and differences. But again, we want people in our life who add something, and we can add something to the quality of their lives, so that if the relationships are off, I actually had a new patient, a couple of days ago, a man in his late 60s, and for most of his life, his first marriage, that was not working. He recently got married to somebody who he said he immediately regretted marrying. And so he's coming into therapy now to take a look at what is this all about? What is this dynamic all about? And of course, much more importantly, what he is going to be willing to do about it. So it's being honest with ourselves, our mental health, our relationships, our physical health. What are you doing? Are you doing the things that you need to do to keep yourself physically in a good place? Which means, eating well and exercising and getting sufficient sleep, turning off the computers. Did you know that the adolescents are spending an average of 9 hours a day on their devices? I mean, it's incredible. It's just incredible. And I was reading that more and more schools, of course, they're taking away the student cell phones during the day, which is a really, really positive thing to do. I mean, you walk down the street, you could almost bump into people because people are on their phones. And one would think, it's a false belief that we are more connected. I think we are more disconnected. And studies are certainly, bearing this out than ever before. So what about the face-to-face, in-person, interactions? One of the things that's been really challenging for me, I have a private practice in New York City and also a very small private practice in East Hampton. In New York City, nobody wants to come in anymore. And, I have a patient who lives a block away and she won't come in. I mean, it's like, really? She wants to Zoom. And fortunately, in East Hampton, it's small. So people do come in. But, and I must just say that in-person therapy is far, far better for everybody concerned than doing all of this on Zoom. And of course, people, you have to make decisions, and hopefully the decisions that you're making, are decisions that are truly in your best interest, which is why I ask you all the time to take an honest look of really how you're living and, are you being good to yourself? And sometimes you may think you're being good to yourself, but in fact, you may very well be engaging in destructive and self-destructive behaviors. So I think these are things that we all need to do on a regular basis. And yet, what are the consequences if we don't? It is our avoidance and our denial and our blame and our self-blame and our defensiveness that really keep us in a downward spiral. And I think it takes a lot of guts and a lot of courage to be willing to look at ourselves, to look at our relationships, to look at our physical health, and to be able to say, listen, I need to make some changes. I need to pivot. And yet, if we refuse to do so and step up to the plate and confront our demons, we need to confront our demons. It is not fun to confront our demons. It becomes increasingly more difficult to fully enjoy our lives. So I hope when you're looking at all of these issues today, that you're able to give yourself a real pat on the back and saying, I am on track. Well, I am so excited. I have a guest. And for those of you who listen to the show on a regular basis, I oftentimes don't have guests. So I just don't have anybody on the show. But I have to tell you about this guest. Her name is Daria Brewer. And as the advice columnist for dance papers, I have an opportunity every year to attend what's called Authors Night in East Hampton. And there are over 100 authors who've just come out with a variety of different kinds of books, who are sitting in this big, big room. And I, of course, vacillate toward people who are writing books about mental health and relationships and trauma and therapy. And so I knew that there was a Daria Burke, and I was just walking around and I'm looking around and I see this absolutely stunningly beautiful young woman who's sitting at this booth. Now she could be on a Vogue cover. It was like, really? She looked like someone who didn't have a care in the world, who never had a care in the world. It was just stunningly beautiful. So I approached her and introduced myself. And of course, we started to talk. And let me tell you, just before I officially start to talk with you, Daria, let me let the audience know a little bit about you. Daria Burke is an American writer, speaker, and possibility strategist, and I want to ask you about that. And a marketer by trade and a seeker at heart. And her writing is poetic and absolutely beautiful. She was named in 2020 Ad Age Woman to Watch, whose creativity and impact have been recognized by big names, Women's Wear Daily, Forbes, Vogue, Teen Vogue, Town and Country, and New York Magazine, the Huffington Post, Black Enterprise. She's appeared on NBC and is a distinguished alumni of NYU Stern School of Business, MBA in New York, the University of Michigan. You were born in Detroit and now calls Los Angeles and East Hampton home. And just by reading this, you would think that Daria Burke has never had a care in the world. However, she's going to tell us about her childhood, growing up under the shadow of an absent father, a mother who was addicted to a variety of different substances, neglect, poverty, and abuse. So, Daria, I see you. I wish you were here in my office in our apartment in New York, and I'm very glad that you've agreed to come on the show. So, welcome, my dear.
Thank you so much. What a warm welcome indeed. I wish I was there with you or you were in East Hampton where I am right now.
We
But
will get together. We will get
we
together.
we
Definitely.
absolutely will. But thank you so much for having me and for such a great introduction.
Well, and well deserved. I sat down last week and I read your beautiful book. I mean, it was like reading a book of poetry, the way you write.
Mm,
I mean, it was amazing,
thank you.
particularly about what you were writing about. I read the book in one sitting. I sat here in my office and it was like I couldn't put it down.
Mm.
And I wanted to ask you, I mean, given the reality of what your original, family of origin life was like, what made you decide to write the book? How have you processed all of this? And all my friends want to know, so how did you do this? How did you do this?
Oh gosh, thank you. That's kind of the million-dollar question, Beatty. And honestly, I'll start towards the end of how, because I spend the book sort of answering that question.
Right.
For so many years, as you've read, I didn't talk about my upbringing. I didn't talk about my childhood. And so I had made my way out of Detroit. And as you mentioned, I'd gone on to the University of Michigan. And it was in college that I first told anyone about my parents and about the way that my sister and I had grown up. And the response that I got from my friend at the time was, I thought you came from money. And it was so enlightening, I think, to get a glimpse into perhaps how I'd presented myself. And I think, frankly, the fact that I was there with her at the same university and the same group of friends and a lot of the same interests, that I couldn't possibly have come from this other world. And it was so different and divergent from what she had experienced. And I suppose at the time I didn't think of it, but what I'd presented. And so I would get that same kind of reaction throughout my life as I'd gotten older and would tell people here and there. It was always, how did you know what to do? And how did you get out? And how did
Yes.
it, how did you come to this life? And I sort of couldn't answer the question really in an articulate way. And I spend almost 300 pages doing that with the book, right? The answer, to be really reductive, is that it's nature and it's nurture. It's, I think, both this deep-seated sense of possibility and faith that I always had, that there was another way, that there was another life, and that I could make choices that could ultimately result in me having a different life.
Mhm.
And I had this really deep conviction. And I think part of it was that I saw my mother making really poor choices as a result of a lack of maturity, as a result, certainly, of her addiction to crack, mostly, and probably to an undiagnosed mental illness. But she
Yeah.
made a lot of choices that not only weren't beneficial to us, but that were harmful to us as kids. And so I think I always understood that, but it really was my understanding much later of neuroplasticity and of epigenetics, these ideas that we could, through exposure to different things and to different people and to a healthier way of living, potentially change the outcome of our lives. And that we don't just sort of arrive at a destination and we're done. And, the origin story that you're born into is the way that it has to be, that you can grow and change and form new neural connections, and by exposing yourself to different things you can ultimately reframe and rewrite the narrative. So that is so much of how I got here. I think to tell the story when I did and how I did was cumulative. It was not one thing. I think the first time I thought about telling the story, I was 30, so almost 15 years ago now. And it was after reading The Glass Castle that I felt really sure that writing a book was the way that I wanted to do it. I had told a group of girls, many of whom had come from a background similar to mine, about my background. Unintentionally, that wasn't my initial plan, but I was brought in to basically give a career talk to a group of high school girls, and I wound up telling them more about my family story and growing up, with a parent, growing up, being raised essentially by abuse and substance abuse. And I saw how that changed in them, what the changes were that were happening in them, and hearing that they saw themselves in me. And then I read The Glass Castle not long after that. And I think that was really the beginning of the aha moment that maybe it would be by writing my own story that I would perhaps give that as an offering to someone else, and that it could maybe be a companion to someone else on their own journey.
One of the things, I mean, it's amazing what you've been able to do. When I think back, and I've worked with a lot of kids, a lot of people who come from very abusive backgrounds, how did you even know as a little girl, as an adolescent, that there was another way? I mean, did you have anybody? You mentioned your grandmother in
Hmm.
book. I mean, was there your grandmother, a teacher, somebody who could say, you know what? There's another way, there's another life, and these are the steps, that you need to take in order to be able to pursue a life very different than the life that you were experiencing as a child. Who was
I
there to
don't,
tell you this?
yeah, I don't know that there was a roadmap or a blueprint laid out for me in any way. Education was always really important in my family. And even my mother, despite all of her challenges and failings, to be present and to be there and to create a healthy environment for us, education was very important. It was
Interesting.
important to her family and to her parents, so much so that my mother graduated high school when she was 15 years old. She was incredibly bright. And I
Mhm.
think just lost in her own sorrows and grief and pain and difficulties, and just wasn't equipped to figure out how to navigate the world with all of that she had inherited and sort of picked up along the way, so to speak, and then let alone to do that and raise children. But even with all of that, it was always very important that we did well in school. So I think I had that seed planted really early, and I did have my grandmother for the first 7 years of my life. And I can't overstate how I think formative that was, even though I don't remember
Right.
most of the first 7 years of my life. Most of us don't, but I remember the security, the stability that her presence offered us. And of course, now in hindsight and as an adult, I could also understand the structural ways in which she was there. She actually created the literal scaffolding that held our lives together. My mother lived in one of the homes that my grandmother owned, and my mother didn't work. And so we were financially supported by my grandma. And so there was material impact in her presence. And then there were, I think, just all the many ways in which she was present and showed care and love, and could instill in me this idea of hard work and this idea that it's nothing is impossible. I never really felt a sense of limitation, even though we were surrounded by lack in many ways. I think I had those early seeds. And being a good student and being, air quote, a good kid, you attract teachers. Teachers like
Right.
a good kid. They
Yeah.
like a good student, right? It's the kids who show struggle and difficulty often, whether they're lashing out or they're struggling with their studies. Um, they don't get the best attention. They might get
Right.
attention, but it's not positive. I got very positive attention. Teachers loved me. And I think that was very much a fuel for me leaning into my education. But it was clear really early on. And I think growing up in the 80s, there were a lot of messages that you finish school and you go to college. And I think that was just the first couple of steps that I always had in my mind was that I'm going to graduate from high school, be a good student, I'll graduate, and then I'll go to college. And that was kind of as far as the roadmap had gotten, but it got me really far.
It certainly did. So this was your maternal grandmother, your
Yes.
mother's mother. So interesting. And of course, wearing my psychotherapy hat, as I often do, even when I'm doing these shows, kind of wonder what happened here. Your grandmother was able to nurture you and be there for you. Do you have any idea what happened or what didn't happen when your mother was growing up? And what did your maternal grandmother, feel and think about her own daughter's
Mm-hmm.
incredible difficulties, the abusive behavior that she demonstrated to you and your sister? I mean, where did she stand, if anywhere, on what was going on in your home when you were growing up?
Oh, I mean, it's so hard to say. And I've wrestled with a lot of those questions many times myself. It's tempting to lionize our grandparents, I think, especially when they were loving and doting as my grandmother was. And I worked hard to try not to do that in the
Uh-huh.
book. The truth is that the grandmother I had is not the mother that my mom had,
Uh-huh. So she
right?
changed.
Of
Yes.
course. I mean, we all change when you're 27 years old and you have a daughter. She's the youngest of your four children. You've been married twice. You've been widowed. I mean, my mother lost her father when she was 12 years old. My grandfather died by suicide.
Uh-huh.
And you can only wonder what that kind of
Right.
trauma does to a person and to a family, especially at a time when families didn't always talk about difficult things and where people didn't go to therapy. And when you sort of just kept pushing forward as the way through even the most harrowing things you've been through. So I can't imagine what that was like for my mom. And I can't imagine how my grandmother navigated that. I have no idea. And the hard part too, Beatty, is that so many families don't talk about these things. They sort of just stay in this space, this sort of spiritual,
Right.
physical space. They get embodied in all the ways that trauma can manifest in our beliefs, our brains, and our bodies. I think that very much happened with my mom. And I can imagine that my grandmother wasn't equipped to deal with
Right.
a husband who dies by suicide and a 12-year-old daughter. I mean, God can only guess, right? So I have to hold space for the
Sure.
truth that she was not, by the time I was born, she was a very different person and had a distance from it. I think my grandmother also knew who her daughter was. I think there was a reason that even though my mom graduated high school at 15, she wasn't allowed to go away to college.
Uh-huh.
I'm sure that was because my grandmother knew that that was probably not something that my mother was ready for.
Right.
And I think I can only guess how they navigated my mother's behavior by the time I was born and my sister were born. I was too young to know. I imagine that it caused a lot of tension between them as my grandma was aware of certain things. I think she probably both enabled the behavior that my mom engaged in to some degree because she was there to protect us in a lot of ways, and she took care of the things that my mother would neglect. And I can imagine that she was also extremely frustrated. I remember I write about this one moment where my mom and some friends of hers had been smoking pot in the house. And I didn't know what it was. I grew up with a mom who smoked cigarettes, but I didn't know what weed was. So, but I remember telling my grandmother that there was a funny smell in the house, and my grandmother confronted my mother, and she was very, very angry about her doing that while we were in the house. And my mother beat me terribly
For
as a
telling,
young child.
for
Yeah,
telling.
and I was, 4 or 5 or 6. I don't even remember exactly how old I was, but I know that to get in trouble for telling was the first indication that there was friction for sure there. And I imagine that my grandmother probably wrestled a lot with how to support my mom in her young adulthood and parenthood while also trying to be there for us kids, knowing that everything wasn't okay.
In listening to what you're saying right now, you learned that telling was something that you better not do.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we
Across the board. You
in
don't
general,
right.
that's right.
Exactly. Because that was one of the things. Did you know that something was wrong? Because so oftentimes, this kind of dysfunction really becomes very normalized in
Mhm.
people's thinking and then in their way of living. Was there something in you, or maybe somebody that said something like, no, this is really not okay? Did you know it?
I think the first indication was probably that experience of telling my grandmother and being punished for it. So
Yeah.
I think that was very clearly articulated in the way in which my mother responded. I don't know that I fully, no one ever had the conversation with me that it wasn't normal, but I could pick up different clues and cues, right? Certain kids couldn't come over to our front porch or to our yard to play with
Yes.
us. We had to go over there if we were allowed to play with them. We, there were things that if I did go over to another friend's house, I would notice, oh, their mom made a snack or
Yeah.
was asking certain questions about their day and or that they had a fridge full of food or that their water hadn't been turned off, they had running water.
Yes.
It was clear early on that, oh, my mom's not like other moms. And sometimes it was because a parent was mindful of how their child engaged with us. And then sometimes it was just watching other kids and seeing their parents in their households. And I think by the time I was, I don't know, 9, 10 years old, middle school age, there were movies too that were coming out at the time. Like I remember, and this was actually before I was that age, but there was a film called New Jack City that was about like the drug business in New York City at the time in the 80s and 90s. And then Spike Lee had a movie
Yes.
out called Jungle Fever. And you could see women who were crack addicts. And
Right.
they were very clearly portrayed as unfavorable, right? There were indications too, even in film, that we started to have. I could see my mom in some of those characters, and it was clear that this isn't right. This isn't the way that it's supposed to look.
Tell me, did social services ever get wind of what was going on in your home with the drugs, with the physical abuse, the emotional abuse? Did anybody ever know? So you kept
Mm-mm.
the secret, I guess you and your sister. Was there ever a conversation that you had with your sister about not telling?
I don't, I'm sure we talked about it. I don't remember us having a specific conversation, but my mom, I remember numerous occasions where if my sister and I would sort of just largely be and have a negative reaction to something that my mom did or said, that we would sort of, I don't know who we would threaten, but we knew that again, telling was not good. And so my mom would threaten that if Child Protective Services were to come, that
Yes.
actually it would be worse for us, that we would be taken out of the home, we would be separated, we wouldn't get to live with each other. She would say things like, no one would want both of you.
Oh,
No one would, no one's going to want to take care of you. And if you wind up in a home where there's a man, he may approach you or take advantage of you or molest you. I mean, she
wow.
really wielded CPS as a threat
Yeah.
to us. And so the only real um, sort of interventions that would sort of happen would be if she would keep us out of school for a long period of time. And then we'd have truancy officers every now and
Right.
again who'd come knock on the door, but they didn't really escalate anything. And
Uh-huh.
they, beyond calling my paternal grandmother at that point, because my maternal grandmother had died. But that was kind of the extent of it. So the interventions weren't so extreme that we were ever really under threat of having social services intervene. And we were very afraid of that happening. My mom made sure that we were afraid that that was an outcome that we couldn't imagine living through.
Right. I mean, did you have a guidance counselor? Because I'm just so amazed with everything
Mm,
that we're living through. I mean, you are amazing, and the resilience somehow the maybe innate know-how of how to navigate this craziness
yeah.
to get you to a place where you were able to study, where you were able to finish high school, where you were able to get an MBA. I mean, was there anybody at all, a teacher, a guidance counselor, anybody that you were able to talk to during all these years, these
Mm-mm.
formative years? Nobody. Did
No,
you?
I didn't tell adults what was
Nobody.
going on. No, no,
Nobody.
no. If anybody had any wind of it, largely,
Yeah.
they didn't show that they did, and no one approached us about it or asked us about it. We and I want to be clear, it doesn't mean that I was a good kids aren't generally good at hiding secrets. So
Right.
I don't know how good I was really at hiding it. I looked very well cared for. I was meticulous about that. And even with the periods where my mom would hold us out of school because she wanted us home with her after she'd spend the whole night out and then come back and
Right.
no, stay home with me. I'm not feeling well.
Yeah.
Um, but I did well in school. So I don't know that we rang the alarms, but I never talked to another adult about what was happening directly or even indirectly. It was just not something
Right.
that I came close to. I didn't really get like I said, I always sort of gravitated towards teachers because I was a good student, but um I mean, I largely kept a lot of people at a distance
I would
because I
guess.
just would fear that people would find out. My high school, she was my dance teacher and cheer coach. Was We were the closest, but I was a teenager by then. I had tested in to get into the high school that I attended. I knew I had such clarity about where I was going by then. But we spent a lot more time together because I could enroll myself in things like cheer and dance. And so I had this coach figure. We didn't talk about it, but I imagine that she probably could just sense that my mom she didn't come to games and she didn't come to performances. And, when you're a coach and you don't know your student's parent,
Right.
I
Right.
think that probably is a good indication, but she never asked about it. She was just really supportive. I mean, there were a couple times where like I didn't have a ride home from school and she dropped me off,
Uh-huh.
and things
And
like
didn't
that.
ask anything.
Mm-mm.
And
Nope.
didn't. So
Nope.
you found a way to compartmentalize,
Oh,
life at home, life outside the home in the most amazing way. And so writing this book, has it been emotionally cathartic for you?
mm.
Have you been
I-
able to go back, the way I practice as a psychotherapist, I'm not about bandage therapy, not me. So, I mean, we can't change history, but I say to my
yeah.
patients all the time that there is a way and there is a need to emotionally work through as best as one can, even though we can't change history, what didn't happen in one's life. So, have you
Yes.
been going through this process vis-a-vis this amazing book that everybody needs to read, by the way. And by the way, I don't think I said of my making. What a beautiful title. What a beautiful, 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 cover of my making, of my own making.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
has this process, I hope it's okay that I'm asking you these questions
Oh,
in the
yeah.
same way that I would be asking patients. So have you found the way, vis-a-vis the book and the writing to
Mm.
emotionally process what didn't happen in your life, growing up?
Yeah, I think well, I had done a lot of therapy
Yes.
before I even could get to a place of deciding to write the book. So I think in some ways I had my toolkit was robust and I
Right.
was
Right.
very well prepared. It was not cathartic at all because you are resurrecting all of these things and stories. And sometimes I have found in my case, the more you remember, the more you remember. And
Mm,
so I would sort of, one thing would come up and then I'd go, oh, and it would remind me of something else. And
mhm.
so, in fact, I felt very raw and very fragile for a lot of the actual writing process. It wasn't getting it on the page because I was also both reliving
Yes.
and recontextualizing and reframing things that
Right.
I had already reframed in
Right.
many instances.
Right.
So I think sometimes you can feel a little nuts when you're going back and interrogating again something you thought you had put into a context. You're like, wait, okay, I feel a little nuts right now. But it was kind of this, I've described it as a reassembly of all of these parts of myself that I sort of had to leave behind as I was healing. On
Yeah.
that journey to feeling more integrated and feeling more whole, you can decide to let go that this maybe version of myself is not strong enough or too innocent or ill-equipped or whatever it is. And so you sort of let it go and you feel like it doesn't have a home in you anymore because this other version of you has to be different in order to do better and to survive and to move on. And I think the book felt like this kind of re-dash membering, like a
Yeah.
reconnection and a reassembly and a remembering of these parts of myself. What's been more cathartic and healing has been talking about it. The
Uh-huh.
book was released of my own making was released in April. So it's been almost 6 months. It's been about 5 months actually. Today, I think 5 months today.
Oh, wow.
And so I've had the last 5 months or so talking about it and meeting people who have read this book and said, "Oh my God, Daria, this
Yes.
was so similar to my experience." Or in some cases, people have said, "We didn't grow up similarly at all, but I had an addicted parent, or I had this happen to me." And they could see themselves reflected in my story. They could see how my own sort of process of awareness and radical acceptance and reframing and then finding tools for resilience building, how that could apply to their own journey and they could see it as a companion to them. So that's been more healing, I think, than anything because I'm able to be held in a larger
Right. Right.
space and context by lots of really wonderful people.
It sounds like the people who, wrote their little blurbs on the cover of the book, I
Mm,
mean, really beautiful and loving and supportive and sincere. If listeners right now could see us on the video, which we will be able to, put out to the world. I mean, they would look at you and it doesn't appear
mm.
that there's any bitterness, that there's any, I mean, have you in some fashion come to terms with what happened and didn't happen with your mom? And has there been an effort at all? There was something in the book that you'd written about trying to engage with her in a different way where the relationship would not end in estrangement.
So for your listeners, I've been estranged from my mother now for almost 23 years.
20
So
years, yes.
yeah, so more than half of my life.
Uh-huh.
And so much of that estrangement was rooted in and continues to be rooted in both her addiction and her lack of accountability
Uh-huh.
and her unwillingness to
Yes.
just accept and say out loud that this was a reality, that these things happened, whether
She
she
still can't.
remembers them or not. No,
She still can't after all these
no,
years.
no. So,
Wow.
so to answer the last question first, I we will continue to remain estranged until I think that's a conversation that she could have. She hasn't reached out. My understanding is that she's kind of not wanted any part to do with this book, and I can understand that. You know, I
Sure,
didn't write
sure.
it hoping that my parents would read it. I didn't write it hoping that they would sort of um seek me out after having had some revelation or anything like that. I wrote it solely for myself and for anybody who may find utility in this. And so I think to be able to write it though without that venom you mentioned, you know, it doesn't, I don't sound, but I'm not bitter. You know, I don't have bitterness towards them. I don't have the anger that I used to have when I was younger. I don't even really have a lot of sadness. Sometimes I do. I feel sad. Sometimes it's because it's sad, right? It is
Yeah,
sad
get a bit sad.
be to be without the people who brought you into the world. But I think the radical acceptance that I have that this just happened to be
Yeah.
those happened to be my beginnings.
Yes.
I didn't earn them.
Right.
Right? I didn't
Right.
ask for
Right.
them. Though
Right.
that origin story was one that I didn't get to create. And I think when you can have radical acceptance for that and compassion for the person who maybe they didn't get to become,
Yes.
you
Yes.
know, there's no way that my parents' lives have played out the way that they dreamed. There's no way that
Right.
a parent could want to
Right.
have
Right.
caused the kind of harm to their child that would keep their child away. And I understand that it might be too painful to look at in her own life. I just can't be in that alternate reality with her where
Right.
it didn't happen. But
Right.
I can imagine that that's hard. So I can also have compassion. I don't have a lot of need to be upset or angry. You know, I don't get anything from feeling bitter. I think it's just it's unfortunate, you know, and I feel a lot of I think that freedom that I've given myself, the liberation that I have that I feel really has allowed me to be there more for myself, to kind of show up and say the child version of me who still feels wounded sometimes and
Right.
can be reminded of those wounds. I know how to take care of her and I know how to show up for her. And I think letting my parents kind of off the hook, so to speak, and I don't mean in the form of forgiveness. They've never asked for forgiveness, so there's
Right.
no forgiveness to give them because they haven't
Right.
asked for it. But to say that, like, my job is to do the unfinished business of raising
Yes.
myself and picking up where they left off. So that I think kind of when I say letting them off the hook, by doing that, I have more time for me. I have a little bit more to give to,
And it
you know,
sounds
the
like you've
person
done,
who
I
needs
mean,
it.
you've done
Yeah.
an absolutely amazing, job. I'm looking at the time here. It's like, where is this gone? It's 3:53. I mean, you say parents, is your biological father in the picture at all?
Neither of them are in my life. They're
Neither.
both alive. They're
They're
both
both,
alive, but
and
they're not in my
both,
life.
and so, and your biological father was a part of your childhood rearing, or not really?
Not
When you
really.
not really.
Not
And
really.
I was wondering about your sister. I know she's married, she has children. How is she, by the way?
She's wonderful. I mean, her kids
Wonderful.
are basically adults now and
Yeah,
all just incredible human beings. Out of respect for their privacy, I was pretty
yeah,
vague in talking
yeah,
about
yeah.
their lives and their stories. It didn't feel like mine to share.
Right.
But wonderful. And I think she's been able to create a life that includes my parents. And
Ah, and
I won't speak to how that manifests in her life and well-being because it's not for me to say, but
Right.
I think we had different needs as human beings do, as
Yeah.
individuals do. I think we had really different needs, and I think our response to the way that we grew up showed up differently. I created a different kind of stability and security in my life, and her reaction was to get married and have kids and create a different sort of familial structure. Um,
Is that
and
what you hope
yeah.
for at some point to get married? Although these days the marriage rates are so down, is that something that you want for yourself?
Marriage and partnership, yes.
Uh-huh.
Children, no. I have no interest
Okay.
in raising children. I always joke, I'm like, I love children, but I don't want to raise them. And
Most challenging job. I mean, I have a
it
daughter. Most challenging
uh
job.
and
That's
look, I'm sure it's rewarding. I think when you've spent so much of your young life adultified and parentified as I
yes,
was,
yes,
I
yes.
I don't want to create the space
Right, right,
to
right.
do that. I feel like in a way it's been a reclamation of all of the time that I didn't have in those early years to sort of
Understood.
develop and grow and be young and joyful. And so I've sort of decided that I can just love on everyone else's kids,
Sounds
which is
sounds
nice.
sounds good to me. I mean,
Yeah.
you look joyful. You look so happy.
Thank you.
You really do. And I mean, it seems like, throughout everything that you've gone through, you found your way. You found a path that seems to be really working for you.
It's
You've
a
gone.
practice.
Of
Yeah.
course, it's a
It's a,
practice.
yeah. And so
Yeah,
I have days where it's harder for some
sure,
reason to feel
sure.
up. I tend to feel pretty up about life and things, but I think it takes a conscious intervention to sort of disrupt
Yes,
despair and to
yes,
disrupt the things that can threaten our sense of well-being and our
yes.
sense of joy. And I think not needing it to be perfect, to feel that, but to be clear that it's sort of my task to do. And so I think having the whether it's the toolkit, the perspective, the people that I'm around,
Yeah,
the practices that I
yes.
truly lean into and rely on, all of that
Yeah,
it's an ongoing practice for
yeah.
sure. And I feel really grateful, and I think I've tried to imagine, spoiler I guess it's not really a spoiler. There was an alternative ending for the book that I tried to imagine a world where if my mom had been well and healthy or had
Yes,
gotten her life together,
yes.
how mine would have turned out. And I couldn't picture it.
Interesting,
I
interesting,
couldn't picture it
interesting,
because I
interesting.
think I'm exactly where I'm meant to be.
Yeah. Well, you sound just wonderful. I'm really, really looking forward to meeting you in person. Jim and I are out half the week in East Hampton, so we definitely have to find a time to
Yes.
to get together, enough with the Zoom and everything like that. I mean, this has been such a pleasure talking with you. It was a pleasure meeting you at Authors Night. And of course, for me, no surprises here. I mean, you've done an amazing job, an amazing journey to do what you've done. And we haven't even talked about all your professional successes. But listen, to be continued. My producer is saying 1 minute, so I'm going to have to say goodbye. And I'll be in touch, okay? And I'll send you the video, and you can put it out to the world, okay? Again, thank you so very much, okay, darling.
Thank
Okay,
you.
everybody of my own making, and you'll be able to listen to it in the archives as well. So, everybody, an hour is come and gone here on the Ask Beatty Show, and I want to leave you with my two weekly messages. The first, of course, is that we all have a responsibility to ourselves to do everything possible to be living our life in ways that are in our best interest. And secondly, we all need to do a much, much, much better job in learning to understand the other, respect the other, listen to the other. And in that way, our world would be a much, much, much safer and more loving world. And that was why we began the show today with what the world needs now is love, sweet love. And I'm going to end the show with the words, what the world needs now is love, sweet love. So again, Daria Burke, thank you so much for being here. We'll talk soon. Goodbye, everybody. Have a good rest of the day. Shana Tova to all my Jewish friends and family. And we will talk next week and every week on the Ask Beatty Show right here on the Progressive Radio Network. Goodbye, everybody.